Hello everyone, thank you for watching the film Dilemmas in Suicide Prevention. I hope you find it helpful and engaging. My name is Thomas John. I'm the producer of that film. I'm also a researcher in the field of human factors and complex system design. I'm here with my two brilliant colleagues who worked together to produce this film. First, Andre Brito, who is the director of the film, and Satish Kumar, consultant psychiatrist, who was involved from the original research to the film production. We are here together to share our thoughts with you about our intention, what we intended to communicate in this film, and what we wanted to show, and maybe most importantly, what takeaway message we want to leave with you. I hope you enjoy and learn something from our discussion. So let me start with Satish. Can you tell us about original research and which film is based on, and how did you start, and then what was the initial aim?
Of course, Thomas.
Yeah.
We were already working on improving the care of people with self-harm, and we wanted to explore all the ways we could improve safety and care of our patients. We invited the human factor team from Loughborough to look at what went wrong in previous suicide incidents so that we could look at improving the suicide risk assessment.
Yeah, that was the initial goal, and we were given 41 suicide incident reports, which we analyzed from kind of whole systems perspective to learn from what went wrong. At the same time, we also interviewed 20 healthcare staff in crisis team, community mental health team, also psychological service, to learn from how they actually successfully detect and respond to the suicide risk. And the research provided in-depth and very important insight into how healthcare professionals are actually working, which is often not fully understood by many of us, management, policymakers, and general public, also media. Ironically, these people tend to heavily influence the way healthcare systems are redesigned and managed. So let's move on to film production, Andra. So can you tell us about the film production process, particularly about what did you do at the beginning and how did you translate the potentially dry and complicated research findings into the film?
I came into the process slightly later after the research was done. So Thomas took me through the research findings. I read as much and as often as possible, but I was also fortunate enough to attend meetings with the healthcare professionals who had been involved. In those meetings, I noticed that all those involved commented on the research findings, often sharing stories to illustrate a particular point. Those real stories were deeply moving, and a combination of them became the inspiration for the characters in the documentary. Our primary audience tends to be very busy and overworked, so showing them something they can relate to was our way of saying we take this seriously, we know what you go through.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, very helpful. Satish, you have been a very important collaborator throughout, both research and also film productions. And when we started film production process, if I remember correctly, you're not sure whether we have something sufficient to communicate. And can you tell us more about that?
We did not have concrete and evidence-based solutions to propose from the research, which I thought originally we will include it in the film. Research identifies areas that need further development, and we also realized the solutions in these areas are in the hands of many people, which include managers, policymakers, media, public, and many others. They together can influence service developments. So what we realized in a way that it is a wicked problem, And the solution for the wicked problem should start from appreciating the nature of the wicked problem. And that's what this film is pitched at. We are actually highlighting the complexities involved in the assessment of suicide risk and the dilemmas that clinicians face on a day-to-day basis, so that the solutions can be developed based on this mature understanding by people working together.
Yeah, thank you. Now into a film then. We have Jenny and Jim in the film. Both stories tell us that there is inevitable, inherent uncertainty and complexity in practicing or in predicting and controlling a suicide risk of patients, especially with mental health problems. So particularly in Jenny's story, positive risk-taking was highlighted. And I assume you really have to understand patients well to take positive risk and build rapport with them, which require lots of time. And there is a first dilemma here between limited time allocated and time required to having holistic understanding of patients for positive risk-taking. As a clinician, any further thought on this particular dilemma, Satish?
The time pressure is a real problem, and it's not always helpful for the clinicians who are working with the patients. Sadly, some of our services are not resourced adequately, and provider organizations, commissioners, as well as government must address this problem. At the same time, there are things that we clinicians could improve even with the available time. Mindfulness during our time with the patient, active listening, and communicating effectively to develop an emotional bond with the patients within a short period of time will certainly help us. So again, the truth is complex, that needs solution from many people, which include government, commissioners, health organizations, as well as clinicians.
Yeah, thank you. So Andre, you also try to show those sign of importance of rapport buildings in Jenny's story, which might not be obvious to audience. So can you tell us more about those sign of rapport building?
Yes, so very early on in the film we see Jenny in this corridor in the clinic, long shot. She looks very lonely. She's about to be discharged but feels very insecure about what might follow because she has had quite a few bad experiences in the past. So she sat there and there's this backpack on the floor that looks almost like a shackle, and this is a metaphor that we tried to embed in the film, a metaphor for the burden that Jenny has been carrying alone for quite a long time. And then her community nurse, a new community nurse arrives, Mary, and when she shows up, instead of focusing in process or doing a risk assessment, the first thing she does is offer to take Jenny home, which is exactly what she wanted to hear. So that's one step. The other step is she picks up Jenny's backpack casually, and this symbolizes the sharing of that burden. Jenny will still have to carry it in the future, just not always. Now somebody will help her every now and then. And there is Mary's playfulness as they walk out of the clinic through the corridor, and that's meant to reinforce this sense of rapport being established.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. So another dilemma identified was between legal obligation and positive risk-taking. Many clinicians we interviewed shared their fear of being open to litigation if their patients lost their lives. In a way, Satish, your job as a clinician require you to take positive risk, but at the same time, you don't want to take too much risk. So, any further thought on this particular dilemma, Satish?
Yes, Thomas, I think it's true that clinicians work under significant pressure. We deal with patients who have high and fluctuating risk. We deal with them in situations which are not consistent or predictable. This presents a real challenge in our day to day work. What helps is an open and honest approach to learn from mistakes, but sometimes the way organizations, media, and legal systems respond can amount to witch hunting. This witch hunting certainly affects the morale of clinicians and prevent them from taking risk, positive risk.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean that taking positive risk is important part of your jobs, and there is also sign of positive risk takings. Andre, you try to show in the film, which might not again have been obvious to some audience who don't have any kind of mental health background. So can you tell us more about the scenes which Jenny was playing with the rubber band around her wrist? And yeah.
So very, very early on, we were told that it's almost impossible to stop somebody from self-harming, but there are strategies to mitigate self-harm urges, from holding ice cubes to drawing with a red pen or red lipstick in places where a person would otherwise cut. Snapping the wrist with a rubber band is one of such approaches, and in this case we thought it was the least upsetting on screen, so partly why we chose it. Not stopping Jenny from visiting the rooftop as well, that is perhaps a more extreme example of positive risk taking, although again safeguards were shown to be in place. In our case, a very alert security guard that kept showing up.
Yeah, that was interesting scene. So let's move on to the Jim story. One interesting uncertainty and complexity in his story was that nobody knew how Jim would respond to the move to the room at the end of the corridor. Andrea, again to you. I mean, can you tell us about what you wanted to show in that story? Yeah.
Jim is in a psychiatric ward because the resources that he needed initially in the community were unavailable, and he ended up in the ward. Subsequently, the matron is doing all that she can to deliver the best patient care under very strained resources, in this case, beds. Jim is not improving, so she has to keep moving him from one room to the next to accommodate the new patients. And that presents a new dilemma.
Yep.
Should Jim be discharged to make space for other patients, or kept in the ward until he improves, however long that might take? With all this going on, nobody notices that for Jim, reaching the end of the corridor, the last room at the end of the corridor, is daunting. As he says, it's the end of the line. So that's what he said, but we also needed to convey that visually with some technical subtleties. So we used two things. Sound, there's some organic sound. The soundtrack is discreet, but creates a sense of almost danger approaching. But we used light as well. So right at the end of the corridor, that last room has a subtle red-orange light coming out of it, which makes it feel, from his point of view, from his perspective, not the other characters, that's almost like the door into hell.
That's right.
That was his perception, what we were trying to convey.
Yeah, thank you. One obvious dilemma in Jim's story was between healthcare professionals' willingness to provide responsible care to the patients who are already in pathway, in the Jim's case, in the ward, and pressure to admit new patients in waiting, or the risk of patient being institutionalized. This is very common in many other parts of healthcare. Satish, you used to be a medical director of your trust, and can you share your thought on that particular dilemma?
We are working in an environment where the resources are limited, but the demands are high. This obviously presents a huge tension when it comes to day-to-day decision making for our patients. Historically, clinicians are not trained to handle this as part of their training, but that's changing. I can't ignore that there are some services which are grossly under-resourced and need sustainable solutions. But at the same time, on a day-to-day basis, clinicians can mitigate this risk to some extent by working as teams, sharing the expertise within the team, and sharing the approach to the risk management with the team. And often a partnership approach with the patient and carers is equally important as well.
So we look at some dilemmas in both Jenny's and Jim's story, and let's move on to the final important points about key takeaway messages, which might be helpful to our audience. And there are three takeaway messages we want to say, and I'll cover first two, and then Satish will cover the last points. And the first key takeaway message is to be aware of hindsight or outcome bias when we respond to the bad instance, like suicide instance in this case. And it is particularly important when we consider the complexity and uncertainty healthcare professionals have to face. Understandably, all human beings, including myself, have an innate desire to clearly pinpoint the cause after things went wrong. The causes we may artificially or simplistically identify can help us to relieve our anxiety and help us to feel in control. But any recommendation or any change made from the simplistic analysis are often counterproductive. So hindsight bias means that we tend to think very easily those who fail to detect suicide risk in this case should have predicted the bad outcome prior to the instance, which is unfair. Outcome bias means that we tend to judge the actions and decisions linked to the negative outcome more severely when we have the knowledge of negative outcomes, which is also unfair. At this stage, recognizing these biases when we respond to instance like suicide instance is the first step toward the better response. The second takeaway message is to be aware of trade-off in our actions and decisions. There is trade-off between providing responsible care for patients who are under care and providing urgent care for new patients in waiting. There is another trade-off between cost of running a dedicated small team to deal with limited but challenging patients, and the cost of providing care for wider population. Again, recognizing these trade-offs is the first step toward better response. Okay, third take-home message, Satish.
The third take-home message is to be aware of the importance of peer support. The healthcare professionals involved in suicide prevention, perhaps mental health care in general, are required to take ultra-adaptive approach. They're expected to embrace risk, master new context, and muddle through. In this environment, you should rely on individual autonomy and expertise rather than the hierarchical organization of this group coming down as policies and guidance, which are important, but not as the individual expertise. Becoming more effective in this environment require working alongside other experts within the team and learning from experience continuously through formal and informal peer support. The formal and informal peer support does need space and time, and the importance of this can be easily disregarded when priority is a short-term cost reduction.
Yeah, that's a very important point. So again, three takeaway messages. Be aware of hindsight or outcome biases. be aware of trade-off in our actions and decisions, and be aware of the importance of peer support. And I would like to wrap up our discussion with brief final comments by both of my friends. Satish, would you like to have a final comments on this?
I feel this was a great journey for us. We have researched an area which has never been explored before. We started the journey with the intention of finding some quick solutions, but soon realized actually the solutions can't be quick fixes. We realized that this is a wicked problem which needs a collective and incremental approach so that we can solve the problem, not create more. We're happy to be sharing this film.
Okay, thank you. It was quite tough journey, Andrea, and maybe you can just summarize your final comments. Yeah.
Of course. So all of us on the production side, crew, actors, learned so much and feel very honoured to have been part of something that will hopefully contribute to a better understanding of this problem. We can't all be in the wards or rooftops saving lives, but at least we feel that we were able to help by telling the stories of those who do. So I think that's we're very, very happy and proud for that contribution.
Yeah. Thank you very much to both of you. I mean, your contribution was great and really appreciated. And thank you for watching it. And if you find it helpful, please feel free to use it yourself and share it with your colleagues and friends. Thank you very much.